I recorded the last video focusing on compensation because I believe the compensation issue is the most critical one in the flood alleviation situation. My number one priority is the continuation of the town with its soul intact. And the story of the town, in my opinion, is the story of independent workers pushing back against state and local authority by means of that economic independence. There is another issue, though, that has huge overlap with this situation and would be argued by a few people to be more important than the survival of the independent economy. And it's certainly of more interest to a wider selection of the community and arguably is causative to the compensation issue. So let's have a look at the planning meeting and see if we can't figure out what on earth is going on with the Mayor of Hebden Bridge.
I'm Councillor Keith Butterick. I'm the leader of Hebden Right Town Council and the current Mayor. So Hebden Right Town Council, at its meeting on 16th of October, considered the planning application by the Environment Agency, and we allowed members of the public to contribute to the debate. Council members noted the comments made and agreed overwhelmingly to approve the application with the following caveats. Firstly, that a clear description of footfall be measured prior to the scheme to form a basis for compensation for businesses that have been affected.
Yeah, so just park this here for now, but that's condition number one that the Town Council put in, which you will see later on the Environment Agency in this very meeting confirm that, in fact, no, they've got no intention of doing that.
Secondly, that the Environment Agency must provide accurate information on how compensation claims can be made and the exact criteria for those claims, along with the guidance on the use of agents.
Ooh, I bet tea went all over the wall in Flood Office when they heard that one. Can you imagine a more toothless condition to put in place? Basically, we insist on you providing full information on where our community can apply for the lowest possible standard of compensation that has been made available to them.
And this was a very important point which you raised, Chair, as well. That every attempt is made to preserve Calder Holmes Park. It is understood that the Environment Agency is aiming to secure an alternative compound site which would be preferable. And again, we are very, very concerned about that.
Good God, it's 3 out of 3 for redundancy. Where do you think it qualifies in the Environment Agency's considerations that you are concerned about it? I'm pretty sure conditions are supposed to be a response to concerns, not be replaced by them.
Along with the loss of the parking.
Yeah, let's not even open that can of worms.
Hebden Road Town Council appreciates that some aspects of the proposed scheme are not popular, but the majority of the Town Council, including Liberal, Democrat, Independent and Labour members, many of whom have lived in the area for a long time, agree that the town cannot afford to miss the opportunity for the Flood Alleviation Scheme, and it is better to work with the Environment Agency to ensure the town is supported through the disruption.
I mean, obviously this is true to an extent, but it contains a vital point that I think illustrates exactly where the council have gone wrong. Yeah, obviously we need to work alongside any institution when we're partnered in the same objective with it, but you also have to understand that the logics and priorities of any national institution like that aren't the same as those held by a small community. The EA's priorities are delivering the scheme within budget, protecting national funding requirements and reducing financial liability. Our community priorities are protecting local livelihoods, preserving the town's character, keeping the social fabric intact. Those priorities are regularly going to come into opposition, as is clearly seen in the compensation issue. When that happens, it's the council's job to guard the heritage, health, culture and economy of the community. The council serves us, not the EA.
As the past month has shown, we just do not know when extreme weather conditions will occur. Sorry, is that okay? All right, and we must take every opportunity to protect the town, its residents and businesses from future flooding disasters.
Here comes the $1 million question that half a dozen FOIs haven't been able to answer. Residents, town and businesses. So all businesses, for practical purposes, all but maybe 2 or 3 businesses are universally against it. That's that done. Residents. Okay, how many residents in the flood zone are being protected by this fluvial flooding alleviation? All the residents live above businesses, so they're protected. There's maybe 10, 15, maybe there's 20 houses scattered around in the flood zone beyond that. So are those the only houses we're protecting? And when they've gone for funding or when they're going for funding, is this list of the houses that are being protected? Is it going to include all these houses that only really get the bottom few steps wet?
Thank you very much. Councillor Dacre.
Question for the first gentleman. So you referred to projected losses of 20%, but we've heard that there is compensation available for that, which we'll be able to ask more. So on the face of it, it isn't obvious to us why, or me anyway, why that means businesses are going to have to close down if there is compensation.
Of the businesses I've spoke to, which is quite a lot in Hebden Bridge, I'd say at least 90% of them, everybody's running on fine lines, fine margins. It's not the extravagant place that everybody believes it is. Everybody's living week to week, month to month. And what we were saying were that the majority of people, if you asked them the question, what would happen if you lost 20% of your takings, they would go under eventually. It won't take long. Now, what was the second part of the question, sorry?
Well, the question was, it isn't clear to me why if compensation is available, then losses automatically mean the business has...
Because we had a full compensation meeting and we couldn't get any answers to what the compensation scheme was as business owners. And we were told that compensation would be based on profits at the time.
Now, in my understanding, and I might be wrong here, I'm happy to be corrected, Councillor Burrows has got the floor. He's been asked a question by the committee and is in the process of answering it. His initial answer is now sitting with the committee, and they've got a valuable opportunity, in my opinion, to zero in on the vital importance of the net profit question. Whether they were going to do that or not, we'll never know, because this happens instead.
At the time.
We've had, this issue has arisen, and as far as the town council is concerned, it's an ongoing discussion.
It hasn't been an ongoing discussion for months since the compensation meeting with the Environment Agency, where all the previous pieces of information were confirmed, such as that it was the Water Act, the Water Resources Act, and then on this night, the new information that it was going to be based on net profit, which stole the show. Since then, I'm not aware of anything that would constitute it still being under discussion. If that's happening with the town council, then it would be fantastic to know that there are other possibilities that could be in play. If that doesn't turn out to be the case, then what's just happened at this meeting is the most important moment that I can identify in the entire meeting has just ceased to be about zeroing in on this net profit problem and instead ended up being a minor digression into literally nothing. Which begs the question, why is the mayor sitting next to Councillor Burrows? I'm pretty naive to the formalities of it, so I might be missing something, but it just seems to me that the line of inquiry would have potentially been a lot more fruitful if the mayor would have been sitting back at the seats with everybody else.
We've had several conversations with the Environment Agency, and they've promised to come back with further figures, and so it's not a set in stone as Councillor Burrows suggests. The Environment Agency has a statutory duty to compensate businesses that are affected by this kind of activity. And as a town council, and I suspect the Colville Council also, will ensure that this will happen. So, I'm sorry, but Councillor Burrows is scaremongering a little bit. I'm not. Let me just finish.
So, Councillor Butterick first potentially derails a fruitful line of questioning that Councillor Burrows is engaged in. Declares that the situation isn't as set in stone as Councillor Burrows presumes it is, when in fact the Environment Agency have affirmed repeatedly that it is. Then accuses Councillor Burrows of scaremongering with no apparent justification whatsoever, before insisting he be allowed to finish what is basically a protracted and so far entirely redundant interruption.
And so consequently, we have to, this is why we said as part of our caveats, we have to make sure that there's adequate kind of information about footfall before it goes ahead, and that there is adequate kind of information regarding the compensation scheme. And it is an ongoing process, and we accept that it's an ongoing process, which is why we say it's better to work with the Environment Agency rather than just kind of completely reject the whole scheme as was suggested.
None of the dozens of people I've interacted with discussing this scheme has ever said that they'd like to scrap the whole thing or they're against it inherently. What people are against is the catalogue of problems in almost every sphere about the present version of the scheme, which are only in existence because, in my opinion, the town council has played no role whatsoever in pushing back against the EA. So the EA have pushed for the maximum convenience and minimum cost to themselves at the expense of the community at every level.
And members obviously will have a chance to ask some of these questions of the Environment Agency later on in this deliberation.
What percentage of businesses in Hebden Bridge have you surveyed, and of that percentage, what percentage have objected?
Councillor Burrows doesn't actually give this ratio. The question moves on, another question gets asked, and he doesn't manage to come back to it. I'm confident he'll approve of me clarifying it for him because it's important. First of all, the committee member asked how many businesses were spoken to. The more pertinent question is obviously how many affected businesses were asked. Obviously, Hebden is filled with online businesses run from cosy houses halfway up the valley side. So they shouldn't be given the same emphasis as businesses impacted by flooding or the effects of the scheme. Those businesses, for obvious reasons, are all in the flood zone, which is also the area the flood works. Counting those businesses, the estimate's between 140 and 160. We don't know precisely because we've had no help from the authorities with any efforts at public consultation. But around 140 of these businesses were visited, of which 2 were in favour of the scheme. 1 refused to comment and 137 were against. Obviously, it's vital to underline here that these 140 properties are by far the most impacted in the town by floods, and still 137 are opposed to the scheme as it's put forward. Campaigners tried to approach the town council with these statements, but were told they couldn't be considered as privacy releases hadn't been given by the business owners to submit their names to the council. So campaigners, most of whom are workers with families, went back onto the street to have these forms signed. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was over 70 that were prepared to have their names actually made public. Others commented on the climate of division in the town and the loss in trade they might suffer from members of the community, many of whom had openly stated on Facebook that the businesses concerned deserved to be boycotted.
There's a group of about 20 of us in Hebden Bridge, and we've all sort of dedicated to each different street, and we've been down a lot of them. We've got written affirmations off a lot of the businesses that you're welcome to look at, all signed to say that other people can look at their information.
Do you know how many of those businesses were affected by the floods in the major flooding event in 2015?
Just to offer clarity from another side here, Councillor Burrows goes on to talk about specific examples, and especially with regard to the Lion and the fact that it wasn't flooded. But beyond the vast majority, I'd be astounded to find any more than 5 of the businesses we spoke to wouldn't have been decimated or severely impacted by the 2015 flood, which has its own unique relevance, as well as the opposite examples of people like at the White Lion, where they've never been flooded, but they're expected to take a huge portion of the burden of the construction.
Yeah, so the White Lion, for instance, wasn't and never has been, and she's against her wall being changed and the cobble's been taken up while that happens because that pub's never been flooded. The shoulder of mutton is decimated pretty much every time there's any high water, and she's completely against this scheme. You've got Catholic, basically all of Bridgegate that's been affected. There's people here today that have been affected by the flooding, and they're against it. They would rather. We're all flood resilient now. We're all ready for it. We understand we're in a flood zone. We've got things in place to slow it down coming into our properties.
It's worth just throwing in here because it seems to be a really important point that gets missed all over the place. The whole debate seems to be between people who are, on one side, the most impacted by flooding, as well as being the people who are carrying 100%, not 99, 100% of the economic burden of the scheme, and who have also spent years developing their flood resilience, So the people who've done all the work and are at all the risk from both sides of the equation, they're all against the scheme. On the other hand, you've got people who are for the scheme. Who are they? Where do they live? I don't know anyone even in the centre, in the flood zone, even in residences, that's openly communicated to me that they're for it. Who is for this scheme? Because I don't want to be flippant about it, but it looks like the only people who are in favour are the people who live up the side of the valley, and the only way any of it even affects them is on property prices or the faff of having to come into Hebden when it's muddy after a flood. Many of these people could very well have been flooded, quite badly flooded, but if they have, it's by surface water or groundwater, both of which are completely absent from this scheme. Not just absent, but worsened, because surface water runoff and drains water can't get back to the river now as a result of the 1.5 metre wall that's going to be built.
And we believe that things like drain management, surface water and things like that, and hilltop management needs looking at first.
Which is exactly what's prioritised in the new DEFRA EA guidance coming in April, which was in substance the exact same recommendations made by 140 odd communities from all over the country, flood affected communities, who spoke at the cross-party select committee hearing in 2016. That was a conclusion they all came to, which is why from April that's what the rest of the country is going to be getting, but not us, because we're 5 years and 6-8 years, whatever it is, and 5 million minimum, probably closer to 10 itself, into a scheme that was unconsulted, poorly planned, and none of the community are remotely interested in. Maybe we should just do what everyone else is doing in April. Rather than being a huge testament to the Environment Agency's fantastic engineering and concrete pouring abilities on the last ever project of this kind, maybe we should be focusing on being a flagship to the new way of doing things. Won't we all agree that this town is a little bit better suited to that?
And that's why you've got parish councils like Wadsworth that understand that, and they've gone against it.
I could see the councillor next to Councillor Burrows shaking his head during that response. I wondered why you were shaking your head then, Councillor Buttrick.
Because it is a very emotive situation. I'm not quite sure of Councillor Burrows' methodology in some of his questionnaires. I've seen the questionnaires that he refers to.
These methods that Councillor Buttrick references repeatedly, which he doesn't go into any more significant detail on, which, whether it's his intention or not, just leads Councillor Burrows to be somewhat smeared, as though he can't think straight. The methods in question are a survey that went round at the very beginning, which was, I wouldn't say it was perceived by, in general, I'd say 2 or 3 people highlighted that they thought it could serve to lead people towards a negative interpretation of the scheme. It didn't, actually. I'll try and dig it out. But regardless of that, the insane insult upon the community of Hebden Bridge to think that if a councillor just unloads the information, like about a 150-foot tower crane and the town being turned into a building site, that the town's not got the capacity to make its own mind up or to go and look for the data either way. It's just that this insult that just keeps getting repeated is ridiculous. Besides, nowhere that I'm aware of was it ever made clear that this was an impartial survey of any kind. The campaigners would have been quite within their rights to draw comedic, cartoon-like, ridiculous, exaggerated versions of the threats in order to draw attention to what was clearly an obvious danger to the town.
But as I say, this is a very difficult situation. We take on board the kind of issues that the businesses have. But we're never quite sure when the kind of environmental situations are going to occur again. And it's better, surely, if we lose this money now, we don't know when we're going to get it back. There's an £80 million scheme in place. And I'm not sure whether the methods that Councillor Burrows are suggesting, they're being discussed and they're being sort of found wanting. The flood of 2015, those kind of measures would never have, that you're suggesting, would never have impacted on the floods then, Scott. You know that very well.
Well, this is an interesting turn of events. If we can disregard the interventions that Councillor Burrows is referring to, which are going to come into line in April with the new DEFRA guidelines. If we can disregard that on the basis that it couldn't have helped us in 2015, why can't we disregard the present application, which the Environment Agency admit wouldn't have helped us in 2015? Am I missing something?
When you look at those the impact of those floods, a lot of councillors who were on the town council who lived through those floods, and they don't want to see that for their residents and for those businesses again.
You talk as I weren't here.
I know you were there, Scott. I know you were there. But I'm talking about the other people who were also there.
I'd like to know how many town councillors have spoke to the businesses other than myself.
There's been quite a few, as you know. Steve Woodhead.
How many of you?
Gentlemen, it's up to members of the committee to ask you questions, not for you to ask each other questions.
To be fair to Councillor Burrows there, it's not really fair of the chair to insinuate that was a tit-for-tat back and forth between both councillors. Councillor Butterick had interrupted Councillor Burrows and then on several times directly referenced him as if they were in a dialogue together. Doesn't seem ideal for the chair to let Councillor Butterick do that repeatedly, and then at the first time that Councillor Burrows responds, it becomes something worthy of bringing to everyone's attention. This lack of formality, or I don't know, it just doesn't seem the way that Councillor Butterick was conducting himself. I just found it surprising that this was the mayor. It made me interested, so I went and had a look to see what else he'd been engaging in during this important week of the flood alleviation finding its way to planning. And I found a few examples, and I don't want to be rude, but it seemed like it just became more and more obvious that Councillor Butterick manages to say very little, despite saying a lot of words, and somehow manages to make, even though it doesn't actually have much substance, manages to make a significant portion of it inaccurate, and then still squeezes in time to attack people or defame people's intentions or accuse them of bad faith, all while maintaining a consistent posture of misinforming the community on what I would say is the most important element of the entire issue. I found myself wondering, and again, I'm really not being rude and I don't want to be antagonistic here, but I found myself wondering, how is this guy the mayor of the town?
To flooding, the most catastrophic of which was in 2015 when streets were deluged and homes and businesses devastated. And the reason behind the Environment Agency's £81 million alleviation scheme, which was approved last night by Calderdale Council.
We're going to improve the flood defences, for example, around here, further on in the town. And the basic concept of it is to, stop the flooding that occurred in 2015.
The basic concept of it is to stop the flooding that occurred in 2015. I'd be interested to hear the Environment Agency's stance on that position. The only thing I've ever heard confirmed for an absolute certainty from the Environment Agency is that the planned scheme will not stop the event that occurred in 2015. The mayor is on primetime TV, and the data point that he chooses for broad distribution is a factual inaccuracy that surely would have been rectified by only the most cursory familiarity with the scheme. And again, I'd like to ask people to apply a little bit of assumed good faith on my part here, because this is in no way a personal attack on Councillor Butterick. I'm just asking if the most senior member of the council and representative of the town and the council in affairs such as this, if it's a good idea for them to be seen to be so consistently misinformed.
And these days, you just never know when those are going to occur again. So it's to prevent those things from happening in the future. We say to those people who oppose, look, we recognise and we accept your concerns. We're concerned and so as well. But let's work together, to make this work for everybody.
By everybody is obviously not referring to the 1% of the town who's carrying 100% of the economic burden, or the people with severe mental health impacts, whose lives are going to be seriously adversely affected by everything from losing parking spaces to losing access to the only green space, the only large green space that we have in the area. We're not doing it for those people, or any of the others who are severely impacted by the scheme as it stands. We're not doing it for them. So that question arises again, who are we doing it for? And that's a question that can be answered very easily by the Environment Agency, who can just let us know which are the houses, which are the properties in the town that are being submitted to DEFRA for funding as being protected. Something that Freedom of Information requests haven't been able to gather the data on due to concerns for privacy, i.e., if the property list becomes public, it could affect the house prices of those people, which is not a very sustainable idea when they've already destroyed hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of business value without even giving us a letter through the door. On the same day as the previous interview, which was the day after the planning meeting, I couldn't find Councillor Buttrick around town talking to the people who were potentially set to lose everything as a result of the application he'd supported and gone some way to prevent Councillor Burrows from revealing. The only place I could find him was with the Courier plugging his new book. The interview had no mention of the meeting and the most consequential moment in Hebden Bridge since the building of the canals and railways, which, to be fair, maybe he wasn't there in his role as mayor, but it's not a stretch to suggest he wouldn't have been there if he wasn't the mayor. I'm not sure any of us would get a full page spread in the Courier for paying to self-publish our first novel. And I'll try dampen my cynicism a bit that it just happened to be publicising this book during the same 36-hour period that there's been more media attention on Hebden Bridge than any time in years. A town that he happens to be the mayor of and a highly searchable figure. I'm sure that had nothing to do with it.
Members, it's over to you now for any additional questions or discussions. Councillor Kingstone.
I feel like I've heard enough. I'm quite convinced by what I've heard, so I'd like to make a proposal unless anybody else wishes to speak before I do so. My proposal is that we accept, that we permit the scheme with the conditions that the officers have proposed. Our officers, our planning officers, have proposed various recommendations, and I propose that those are all applied.
Can I see those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members.
So to finish up, it could be argued when Councillor Burrows was the single elected official at the meeting representing the huge majority in the town who don't want the scheme as it exists, for the mayor to defame that critique from the most senior position on the council, could it be said then that the meeting's value is called into question? If Councillor Burrows couldn't possibly have persuaded the committee, no matter what he said, then why have the meeting and why is he there? And if he could theoretically persuade the committee, then what might be the impact of the mayor of the town leading the entire room through a falsehood to disregard him and question his quote-unquote methods? It's too late now for the community to be heard at the meeting. But is there a lesson here with regard to the standards expected of elected officials when interacting, even just in public, let alone at a planning meeting that is going to define the town possibly for generations? The degree of status of Councillor Buttrick's position when viewed in conjunction with the misrepresentations he's made has relevance for the well-being of the community. Maybe he did it all innocently, but if he did, what do we call that? As I said before, this isn't a personal attack. It's vital to be able to call attention to deficits in councillors and council function. And if anyone can cast any of this in a different light or correct me anywhere, I'm available for a brew. But the facts at hand seem to illustrate that the lack of judgment, awareness and diligence apparent here has potentially created outcomes that will change the town forever. If that's not worthy drawing attention to, what is? And what's the course of action now with regard to Councillor Buttrick? Are we all on board with that standard? And he's by no means alone. He's not even the worse for it. And for that reason, the next video will be titled Councillor Rosemary Hedges, a unique method of community outreach.